To my children, my dying wasn't a tragedy to be shared. It was a scheduling error to be solved with maximum efficiency. I realized then that even my mortality had become nothing more than a quarterly project on their busy calendars.
Mom, let's be honest. What exactly do you expect us to do right now?
My son Richard's voice was calm, professional. It was almost kind. There was no anger, no guilt, just pure, cold logic. And behind his words, I heard it, a faint, rhythmic sound. Click, 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 click. The sound of a keyboard. My son was multitasking through the conversation about my health, fitting me between agenda items in his workday. I was simply a bullet point at 10 a.m., check on mother. That typing sound was sharper than any insult. It felt like something I had trusted for 72 years had finally snapped, dropping like heavy metal onto a cold tile floor. It was a Tuesday morning when everything cracked open. I remember because Tuesdays were always my favorite. The farmer's market opened early. I'd walk down with my cloth bags and buy fresh bread, maybe some flowers if they looked cheerful. Then I'd come home and call my children, one by one, just to hear their voices. At the time, I didn't realize I was the only one keeping that rhythm alive. That particular Tuesday, I had baked blueberry muffins. The house smelled warm and sweet. Sunlight slanted through the kitchen window, catching dust motes in the air. I set the table for one, as I always did now, but I kept the chair across from me pulled out, just in case. The phone call with my eldest son, Richard, started normally enough. "Hi, sweetheart. How's your week going?" "Busy, Mom. Really busy." His voice had that distracted quality I'd learned to recognize, the sound of a man already thinking about his next task. "I made those muffins you used to love. I was thinking maybe—" "Actually, Mom, I need to talk to you about something." I straightened in my chair. His tone had shifted, sharper now, more focused. "The family's been discussing your living situation," he said. The family. Not we, not your children, some abstract collective that apparently met without me. "We think it's time to consider options. You're not getting any younger. That house is too much for you. And honestly, it would give us all peace of mind if you were somewhere with staff, people trained for this." I looked around my kitchen, at the counters I'd wiped down 10,000 times, at the refrigerator covered in grandchildren's drawings held up by magnets I'd collected from every family vacation, at the table where I'd served Sunday dinners for decades. Trained for this, as if I had become a medical condition that required professional management. "I'm fine here," I said, quietly. "Mom," he exhaled, and I recognized that sound too, the particular sigh he used when I was being unreasonable. "Let's be honest. What exactly do you expect us to do right now? We all have lives, careers, kids with college applications and soccer tournaments. Sarah's dealing with church commitments. Tom's on the West Coast. We can't just drop everything every time you need something." I hadn't asked him to drop anything. I'd invited him for muffins. But I didn't say that. I had learned long ago that defending yourself only proves you're defensive. "You're right," I said instead. "You're all very busy." The conversation ended shortly after that, pleasant enough on the surface, reasonable, concern wrapped in logistics. After I hung up, I sat very still. The muffins cooled on the counter. The sun moved across the floor. The house settled around me with small creaking sounds that used to feel like company. I thought about the last time Richard had visited. Thanksgiving, maybe? No, it was the one before that, 14 months ago. He'd stayed for 3 hours, checked his phone 17 times, and left before dessert because of traffic. My daughter called later that afternoon. Sarah spoke in the soft, compassionate voice she probably used at her prayer groups. "Richard told me about your conversation. Mom, we're just worried about you. You understand that, don't you? This is all coming from a place of love." Love. The word sat between us like a third person in the conversation. "I know," I said. "Good, because the last thing we want is for you to feel abandoned or unloved. You're always on my mind, always in my prayers." After she hung up, I did something I'd never done before. I found an old notebook in the drawer where I kept recipes and grocery lists. I turned to a blank page, and I wrote down the date, the time, and exactly what had been said. No feelings, just facts. I didn't know yet what I was documenting, but some instinct, maybe the same one that had kept me alive this long, told me to pay attention. Looking back now, I understand what was happening. My children weren't being cruel, they were being efficient. They had turned my existence into a problem that required solving, and they were approaching it the way they approached everything else, with calendars, delegation, and the quiet confidence that their reasoning was unassailable. What they didn't know was that I was beginning to see the pattern too, and patterns, once recognized, are impossible to unsee. That night, I lay in bed listening to the house breathe around me. The radiator clanked. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a dog barked twice and fell silent. I thought about Richard's keyboard clicking while we spoke, about Sarah's scripted compassion, about Tom, who hadn't called at all. And I thought about something my mother told me once, years ago, when I was young and still believed love was unconditional. "Maggie," she'd said, "people will tell you who they are. The trick is learning to listen." I hadn't understood then, but lying there in the dark, with the weight of my children's reasonable voices still pressing against my chest, I finally did. I wasn't a person to them anymore. I was a responsibility, an item on their mental to-do lists, filed somewhere between renew car insurance and scheduled dentist appointment. The worst part? I had trained them to see me this way. Decades of being low maintenance, undemanding, endlessly understanding. I had made myself so easy to postpone that they stopped showing up at all. Something hardened in me that night. Not anger exactly. Something colder, more deliberate. If they saw me as a problem to be managed, then perhaps it was time to become a problem they couldn't ignore. I didn't know it yet, but that decision would change everything. The question wasn't whether they loved me. The question was whether they would prove it when it mattered most. And I was about to find out. The decision came to me in the shower 3 days later. Water ran down my back, hot enough to sting. Steam fogged the mirror. I stood there with my eyes closed, letting the heat work through my shoulders, and the thought arrived fully formed, as if it had been waiting for permission. I would tell them I was dying. Not as manipulation, not as punishment, as a test. A simple, elegant experiment. What would my children do if time ran out? At the time, I didn't realize I was crossing a line I could never step back over. I thought I was just asking a question, but some questions change you in the asking. I practiced the words in front of the bathroom mirror, my face still flush from the shower. The doctors found something. It's terminal. 6 months, maybe less. The sentences felt strange in my mouth, heavy. like swallowing stones. But they came out smooth enough when I made the first call. Richard answered on the third ring. I heard traffic in the background. He was driving. "Mom, everything okay?" I steadied my voice, kept it calm, almost apologetic, the way I'd trained myself to be. "I saw the doctor yesterday about those tests I mentioned." A pause. The traffic noise continued. Then his voice came back, more focused now. "And?" "I said they found something in my lungs. It's advanced. They're calling it stage 4. Silence. Not the shocked kind, the processing kind. "Jesus, Mom." His voice stayed level, controlled. Okay, let me think. Have you gotten a second opinion? What treatment options did they give you?" "They said treatment would only buy time, maybe a few months. The side effects would be..." "So what are you saying? You're just giving up?" The question landed like a slap. I gripped the kitchen counter. "I'm tired, Richard, and I want to spend whatever time I have left with the people I love." Another pause, longer this time. I heard him exhale slowly. Of course you do. Look, I'm pulling into the office right now, but let me call you back tonight. We need to discuss logistics, figure out what makes sense." Logistics. Even my death required a project plan. "Okay," I said. "And, Mom, try not to panic. We'll figure this out." The call ended. I stood in my kitchen, phone still in my hand, waiting to feel something. Guilt, maybe? Shame? But what I felt instead was curiosity. Cold, clinical, precise. He hadn't asked how I felt. He'd asked about treatment options. Sarah called me that evening. Richard must have told her immediately. Her voice trembled with practiced emotion. I could picture her, phone pressed to her ear, one hand over her heart. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I don't even know what to say." "It's okay, sweetheart." "No, it's not okay. Nothing about this is okay." She sniffled. I heard tissue paper rustling. "I've been praying all afternoon, just praying for strength, for guidance." "I appreciate that." "The timing is it's so hard right now. The church is in the middle of our winter outreach program, and I committed to leading it months ago. But I'll talk to Pastor Jim. Maybe someone else can take over. I just need to see when that's possible." I waited. She kept talking. "And the kids have midterms coming up. Trevor's applying to colleges. This is such a critical time for him. But obviously, family comes first. You know that. You've always known that." "Of course," I said quietly. "I'll try to come visit soon as I can arrange things. You understand, don't you, that I'm not putting this off? I'm just trying to be responsible about everything I've already committed to." "I understand." After we hung up, I opened my notebook. I wrote down the date, the time, and the key phrases. Not the emotional parts, just the facts. "As soon as I can arrange things. Critical time for Trevor. Winter outreach program." Looking back now, I see how quickly the pattern revealed itself. They were already building their defenses, constructing elaborate justifications that would hold up under scrutiny later. But at the time, I told myself to be patient, to wait. Tom didn't call at all. Days passed. 4, then 5. When he finally reached out, it was via text message. "Richard told me, 'I'm sorry. This must be scary. Let me know if you need anything.' 14 words, sent from across the country, from a life so separate from mine that my dying barely caused a ripple. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I wrote it down in the notebook. Date, time, exact wording. By then, I had started including other details too, measurements of absence, phone calls, their duration, their frequency, the reasons given for ending them quickly, promised visits, dates suggested, dates postponed, excuses offered. The visitor log at the hospital I hadn't even checked into yet remained blank in my mind, but I could already see how empty it would stay. The hospital room they eventually admitted me to smelled like bleach and old flowers. The fluorescent lights hummed constantly, a mechanical drone that never quite faded into background noise. At night, machines in distant rooms beeped out their lonely rhythms, proof that other people were dying nearby, their bodies measured in numbers that declined slowly toward zero. Nurses came and went. Their shoes squeaked against the linoleum. They spoke to me, kindly but efficiently, the way you speak to someone whose name you won't remember tomorrow. The chair beside my bed stayed empty. Tom called twice. Sarah called once, her voice thick with tears that somehow never translated into presence. Tom sent another text. Thinking of you. I wrote it all down. And then, on the fourth afternoon, the door opened. Footsteps I didn't recognize, younger, lighter. I looked up. Evan stood in the doorway. My grandson, 17 years old, tall and awkward in the way teenage boys are when they haven't quite grown into their height yet. He didn't say anything at first, just walked to the chair and sat down. Then he reached out and took my hand. His palm was warm. His thumb moved slowly across my knuckles, over the thin skin mapped with veins. We sat like that for a long time, no words, no explanations, just presence. That was the moment I knew I wouldn't correct the lie. Not yet, maybe not ever, because Evan had answered the question I was really asking, and his answer was the only one that mattered. After he left that evening, I lay in the dark and let myself cry for the first time since this began. Not from sadness, from relief. Someone had shown up. Someone loved me not in sentences, but in silence. And for the first time in years, I felt seen. But what I didn't know yet, what I couldn't have predicted, was that Evan's presence would force me to face a truth far more painful than my children's absence. It would make me see myself clearly, and that clarity would hurt worse than anything they could do to me. Evan came back the next day, and the day after that. He didn't announce his visits, didn't text ahead or ask permission. He simply arrived after school, backpack slung over one shoulder, and took his chair beside my bed. Sometimes he did homework. Sometimes he scrolled through his phone. Sometimes he just sat there, present in a way that required nothing from me. On the third visit, he refilled my water pitcher without being asked. That small gesture cracked something open inside my chest. I watched him move around the room, efficient, quiet, unbothered by the antiseptic smell or the beeping machines. He handled the plastic pitcher carefully, tested the water temperature with his finger before pouring. "You don't have to keep coming," I said. He looked at me with those serious eyes he'd inherited from his father, my youngest son's eyes, before distance and excuses had clouded them. "I know," Evan said simply, and that was all. At the time, I didn't realize I was documenting the contrast, but every time Evan visited, I noticed what he did, and every time my phone rang with another call from my children, I noticed what they didn't. The notebook became my companion. I kept it in the drawer of the hospital nightstand, beneath a box of tissues and a paperback someone had left behind. Every evening after visiting hours ended, I would take it out and write. No emotions, just facts. Tuesday, 3:47 p.m. Richard called. Duration, 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Asked about medication schedule. Mentioned quarterly earnings report. Promised to visit soon. Wednesday, 6:15 p.m. Sarah called. Duration, 9 minutes and 31 seconds. Cried. Said she's been wrestling with guilt. Youth group commitments conflict with visiting hours. Asked if I understood. I said yes. Thursday, no calls. Tom sent text at 11:52 a.m. How are you holding up? Thursday, 3:30 p.m. Evan arrived. Stayed 2 hours. Brought homework. Refilled water pitcher. Asked if I wanted the blinds adjusted. Fixed the TV remote that wasn't working. Held my hand before leaving. The pattern emerged like a photograph developing in chemicals, slowly at first, then all at once. My children spoke in concerned voices. They used words like difficult and heartbreaking and impossible timing. They constructed elaborate explanations for why presence was currently beyond their capacity. But Evan just showed up. Looking back now, I understand what I was building. Not just a record, evidence, a case against people I had once trusted to love me without conditions. But at the time, I told myself I was simply paying attention. The contrast sharpened as each passing day. Richard called during his commute. I could hear his car radio in the background, NPR commentators discussing economic policy. His voice carried that practiced sympathy I'd learned to recognize, warm on the surface, distracted underneath. How are you feeling today, Mom? Tired, I said truthfully. I can imagine. Listen, I talked to Susan about flights. We're looking at options. The problem is my schedule's completely packed through the end of the quarter, but we're going to make it work somehow. Somehow. That word doing all the heavy lifting. There's no rush, I said, even though there was, even though terminal meant exactly that, a timeline running toward an endpoint. You're being so strong about this, so understanding. His voice warmed with approval. That's one of the things I've always admired about you. You never make things harder than they need to be. After he hung up, I sat very still. He had just praised me for my own erasure, for making my dying convenient. I wrote it down, word for word. Sarah's calls followed a different pattern, longer, more emotional, heavy with theological language. I keep asking God why this is happening now, she said one evening, her voice thick with tears. Why he would test us this way when we're already stretched so thin. I noticed she said us, not you. Maybe it's not a test, I said quietly. Of course it is. Everything is. That's what faith teaches us, that suffering has purpose, that God never gives us more than we can handle. I thought about pointing out that I was the one dying, that perhaps God's capacity calculations might be focused elsewhere, but I stayed silent. She continued talking, about her prayer group's response, about the casseroles people had offered to bring, though they lived 800 miles away and the casseroles wouldn't reach me, about the emotional weight of watching a parent decline. I just want you to know I'm thinking about you constantly. You're always in my heart. In your heart, that intangible location where love costs nothing and requires no sacrifice. I know, I said. After she hung up, I added her words to the notebook. Then I wrote one more line, a question I couldn't answer yet. Does thinking about someone count as love if you never actually show up? Evan came that afternoon with a book of crossword puzzles. My mom does these when she can't sleep, he said, setting it on the nightstand. Thought you might like them. I looked at the book. Pharmacy brand. Probably cost $3. He'd bought it with his own money. Thank you, I managed. He shrugged, settled into his chair, pulled out a textbook with a cracked spine. We sat together in comfortable silence. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. Somewhere down the hall, a nurse laughed at something. The afternoon light slanted through the Venetian blinds, casting bars of gold across the linoleum floor. This, I thought, is what love looks like. Not words, not explanations, not promises of future intention, just presence, just showing up. That evening, after Evan left, I picked up the crossword puzzle book. Something fell out from between the pages, a folded piece of notebook paper. I opened it carefully, his handwriting, careful and slanted. You're not alone. 3 words, no signature needed. I pressed the note against my chest and let myself feel the weight of it, the realness. Then I placed it carefully inside my notebook, between pages of documented absence. The contrast was almost unbearable. By the end of that week, the notebook had become something more than a record. It was a mirror. Every entry showed me not just what my children were failing to do, but what I had trained them to expect. Decades of being low maintenance, of understanding, of never making demands. I had taught them that my needs were optional, that my presence was negotiable. And now, facing death, real or fabricated, they were simply following the curriculum I'd written. Looking back now, I see that this was the moment everything shifted, when documentation became evidence, when observation became judgment. I wasn't just recording their absence anymore. I was building a case, and the verdict was already clear. But what I didn't know yet, what I couldn't have predicted, was that someone else had been watching too. Someone who understood exactly what I was doing, and who was about to force me to confront a question I wasn't ready to answer. What happens when the evidence convicts not just them, but me? Mary arrived on a Tuesday morning without warning. I heard her before I saw her, sensible shoes moving with purpose down the hospital corridor, the confident stride of someone who'd spent 40 years navigating these halls as a nurse. The door opened. She stood there in a cardigan the color of dried roses, her silver hair pulled back neatly, her eyes taking in everything at once. "Maggie," she said simply. Not "how are you feeling," or "I'm so sorry," or any of the practiced phrases people use around the dying. Just my name, a statement of presence. She pulled the chair closer to my bed and sat down. Her movements were economical, familiar. She'd spent decades in rooms like this one, watching bodies fail and families fracture. "She heard," she said. I nodded, waited. Mary had been my friend for 37 years. We'd raised children in adjacent houses, shared recipes and babysitting duties, and the quiet confidences that accumulate over decades of proximity. She knew me better than almost anyone, which meant she also knew when I was lying. At the time, I didn't realize how transparent I'd become. I thought I was holding the deception carefully, performing terminal illness with just enough authenticity to pass inspection. But Mary sat there looking at me with those calm, assessing eyes, and I felt the whole construct wobble. She didn't speak right away, just studied me, the machines, the room. Then her gaze landed on the nightstand, on the drawer that wasn't quite closed. The notebook was visible, just the corner of it, the blue cardboard edge peeking out. Mary's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between us. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the drawer. My throat tightened. "Mary, I'm not here to judge." Her voice was gentle but firm, the voice she probably used with confused patients, the ones who needed honesty more than comfort. I nodded slowly. She opened the drawer, took out the notebook, held it carefully, the way you'd hold something fragile or dangerous. She didn't ask permission to read it, just opened to the first page and began. I watched her eyes move across my handwriting, the dates, the times, the documented absences, the measured contrast between phone calls and presence. She read for a long time, several pages, maybe more. The fluorescent lights hummed above us. Somewhere down the hall, a medication cart rattled past, the ordinary sounds of a hospital afternoon. Finally, Mary closed the notebook, placed it carefully on her lap. "Records don't lie," she said quietly. Those 3 words landed like a verdict. Not, "You shouldn't be doing this," or "This is wrong," or any of the moral objections I'd half expected. Just a simple acknowledgement of fact. Records don't lie. "How long have you known?" I asked. Mary's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile, something sadder. "That you're not actually dying? Since about 30 seconds after I walked in." She gestured vaguely at me. "Your color's too good, your breathing's steady, and you're sitting up without any real discomfort." I should have known. Mary had seen thousands of terminal patients. She could read decline the way other people read newspapers. "Are you going to tell them?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. "Tell them what? That their mother is documenting their neglect?" Mary shook her head slowly. "That's not my story to tell, Maggie." She handed the notebook back to me. I took it, feeling its weight differently now. It had been a private accounting. Now it was witnessed, validated. "The question is," Mary continued, her voice still gentle, "what are you planning to do with it?" I didn't answer, because at the time I didn't actually know. I'd been so focused on gathering evidence that I hadn't thought about the trial that would follow. Mary seemed to understand my silence. She reached over and took my hand. Her palm was warm and dry, calloused from years of work. "I'm not going to tell you this is right or wrong," she said. "God knows I've seen enough families fall apart in these rooms to judge anyone's methods." She paused, squeezed my hand gently. "But I will tell you this, whatever you're building toward, make sure you can live with it after, because the anger will fade eventually, the hurt will fade, and you'll be left with whatever you've done." Looking back now, I understand she was offering me an exit, a chance to step back from the edge before the fall became inevitable. But I wasn't ready to hear it. After Mary left, I sat with the notebook open on my lap. Her words echoed in my mind, "Records don't lie." They didn't. Every entry was factual, verifiable. The dates and times could be cross-referenced with phone logs. The excuses could be matched against calendars and commitments. I wasn't inventing their absence. I was just making it visible. That evening, Richard called. His voice carried its usual tone of controlled concern, the emotional equivalent of a well-written memo. "Just checking in. How are you managing?" "Fine," I said. "Evan was here this afternoon." A brief pause, barely perceptible, but I'd learned to listen for the spaces between words. "That's good, that he can be there. Teenagers have more flexibility, obviously." Obviously. as if flexibility were the only variable, as if choosing to show up weren't a choice at all. I said, "He brings his homework, sits with me while he studies." "Well, that's nice for both of you." Richard's tone warmed slightly, approving. "It's good that he's getting something out of this too, learning about family responsibility." After we hung up, I wrote it down, every word. Then I added a note I hadn't included before. He praised Evan for doing what he himself won't do, and called it learning responsibility. That was the first time I let judgment seep into the record, the first time the documentation became accusation. Mary's words came back to me. "Make sure you can live with it after." I closed the notebook, slid it back into the drawer, but I knew I wouldn't stop, couldn't stop, because the evidence was accumulating too perfectly, too damning. And some part of me, the part that had been diminished and dismissed and made optional for decades, wanted them to see it, wanted them to face the arithmetic of their love. The next morning, Evan arrived earlier than usual. He looked different somehow, more serious, older. He set his backpack down but didn't pull out homework. Instead, he stood at the foot of my bed, hands shoved in his pockets, and studied me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Grandma, are you really that sick?" The question hung in the air between us, like smoke. At the time, I didn't realize this was the moment everything would change. I thought I was still in control, still running my careful experiment, still documenting from a safe distance. But Evan's eyes, clear and direct and heartbreakingly honest, told me something different. He already knew the answer. The only question left was whether I'd be brave enough to tell him the truth, and whether that truth would set me free or trap me in something far more complicated than I'd ever intended to create. I looked at my grandson standing at the foot of my hospital bed, and something inside me crumbled. Not collapsed, crumbled, the way old mortar turns to dust between bricks. His question still hung in the air. "Are you really that sick?" I could have lied, should have, maybe, maintained the fiction, kept him safely outside the architecture of what I was building. But his eyes wouldn't let me. They were too clear, too direct. The eyes of someone who'd been showing up when no one else would, who'd earned the right to truth through simple, relentless presence. "No," I said quietly, "I'm not." The word felt like stepping off a cliff. Evan didn't react immediately. He just stood there, processing. His hands stayed in his pockets, his expression didn't change. Then he moved to the chair, sat down slowly, looked at his shoes. The silence stretched between us like a wire pulled tight. "How long have you known?" I asked. He shrugged slightly. "I wasn't sure at first, but you don't move like someone who's dying, and the nurses, they're nice to you, but not in that careful way, you know?" I did know. That particular gentleness reserved for the terminal, the soft voices, the extra patience. He was right. The nurses treated me like someone inconvenienced, not someone leaving. "Why?" he asked finally, still not looking at me. "Why would you lie about something like that?" At the time, I didn't have a good answer, or maybe I had too many answers, all of them tangled together. "I wanted to see who would come," I said. It sounded small when spoken aloud, petty even. Evan lifted his head, looked at me directly, and "You came," my voice cracked slightly. "Only you." He absorbed this, nodded once, a small movement. "Yeah," he said, "I guess that's true." We sat in silence for a long time. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. Outside the window, a siren wailed past, then faded into distance. I waited for him to be angry, to accuse me, to call me manipulative or cruel, or any of the words I'd already started using on myself in the dark hours before dawn. But Evan just sat there, thinking. Finally, he spoke. His voice was quiet but steady. "I'll still come." 3 words, the same 3 he'd written in the note tucked inside my crossword puzzle book. But hearing them now, after the truth, they cut deeper. "You don't have to," I said. "Now that you know." "I know." He cut me off gently. "I'll still come." Looking back now, I understand what he was doing. He was refusing to let my deception erase his choice. He'd decided to show up, and the lie didn't change that decision. But at the time, sitting in that hospital room with the truth exposed between us, all I felt was shame. Not for lying to my children, for dragging him into it, for making him complicit in something I was no longer sure I could justify. That evening, after Evan left, I took out the notebook. I stared at pages of careful documentation, dates and times and measured absences, the mathematical proof of abandonment. Mary's words echoed back. "Make sure you can live with it after." And now Evan's, "I'll still come." I had thought I was running an experiment, testing a hypothesis about love and presence and family obligation. But experiments require distance, objectivity, clean variables, and I was drowning in this one. Because Evan's loyalty forced me to see something I'd been avoiding. This wasn't just about whether my children would show up. It was about who I'd become while waiting for them. Someone who weaponized illness, someone who documented absence like a prosecutor building a case, someone who'd turned love into a performance review, measuring their worth through metrics and evidence. I had spent decades being low maintenance, undemanding, endlessly understanding, and when that strategy failed, when being easy to ignore resulted in being ignored, I'd swung in the opposite direction. Become someone who tested and measured and trapped. The notebook trembled in my hands. For the first time, I wondered if I was holding a mirror that reflected not just my children's failures, but my own. Sarah called the next morning. Her voice came through the phone bright and determined, the tone of someone who'd made a decision. "Mom, I've been praying about this all week, really wrestling with it." I waited, let her fill the silence. "I talked to Pastor Jim and to Brad, and we've decided I'm going to come visit. Next month, I'll fly out for a long weekend." Next month, 4 weeks away. "The timing's still not ideal," she continued quickly. "We're right in the middle of planning the spring mission trip, but family comes first, obviously, and I need to see you." Need, the word doing complicated work. "That would be nice," I said carefully. "I know it's not soon enough, I know that, but I hope you understand I'm trying to balance everything, my responsibilities here, my commitment to the church, the kids' schedules." The familiar script, the elaborate justification. But this time, listening to it, I heard something different underneath. Not cruelty, not callousness, fear. She was terrified, terrified of watching me die, terrified of guilt, terrified that showing up would require something from her she didn't know how to give. And she was covering that terror with schedules and obligations and the safe, clean language of responsibility. Looking back now, I see that this was the moment my anger began to crack. Not disappear, but fracture just enough for something else to seep through. Something uncomfortably close to recognition. Because I had spent 72 years avoiding difficult conversations too, smoothing over conflict, making myself small to keep the peace. I had taught my children that uncomfortable truths could be managed with kind words and good intentions, and now they were using those same tools to manage me.
After Sarah hung up, I didn't write anything in the notebook. I just sat there, holding it, feeling its weight. The evidence inside was real, undeniable. My children had failed me in measurable, documentable ways. But I had failed them too. Failed to teach them that love requires presence, not just sentiment. Failed to demand better while there was still time to learn. Failed to be honest about my own needs instead of performing endless understanding. The lie I'd told them was cruel, I knew that. But the lie I'd told myself, that being easy to be abandoned was a form of virtue, was worse. Evan had seen through both lies, and he'd chosen to stay anyway. That choice was the mirror I couldn't look away from. It showed me what love actually looked like when stripped of performance and expectation and accumulated resentment. It looked like a 17-year-old kid doing homework in a hospital room. It looked like showing up when no one asked you to. It looked like truth, even when truth was painful.
That night, I made a decision. I would tell my children the truth, eventually, when the time was right. But before I did, I needed to understand what I was actually angry about. Not their absence, that was just the symptom. What I was angry about, what I'd been angry about for years without admitting it, was that I'd erased myself so thoroughly that when I finally needed them to see me, there was nothing left to recognize. I had become optional because I'd made myself optional. And that truth was harder to face than any abandonment. But facing it was the only way forward, the only way to decide whether the evidence in my notebook was justice or just another form of erasure. At the time, I didn't realize how quickly that decision would be taken out of my hands, or that the truth would leak out in the worst possible way at the worst possible moment, or that when it did, the backlash wouldn't just be about what I'd done, it would be about who I'd revealed them to be, and that revelation would hurt them far more than any lie ever could. The truth leaked out on a Thursday afternoon. I didn't tell them. I had planned to, eventually, on my own terms, but the universe doesn't respect careful planning. One of the nurses mentioned something to another nurse. That other nurse happened to be Sarah's college roommate's sister. Small-town medicine has long threads of connection you can't always see until they pull tight. By evening, my phone was ringing. Richard's name lit up the screen. I stared at it for 3 rings before answering. "Is it true?" His voice was cold, controlled, the tone he probably used in termination meetings. "Richard, is it true that you're not actually sick? That you lied about being terminal?" The word lied landed like a slap. "Yes," I said quietly, "it's true." Silence. Not the processing kind, the furious kind. "I need you to explain something to me." His voice stayed level, which somehow made it worse. "I need you to help me understand how a mother does something like this to her children. To her children, not to herself, not because of loneliness, to them, as if they were the victims. I wanted to see who would come, The explanation sounded even weaker now than when I'd told Evan. So this was a test? He let the words sit there, heavy with judgment. Do you decide to put us through hell to make us think we were losing you because you wanted to prove some kind of point? It wasn't about proving. Do you have any idea what you've done? His control was fracturing now, anger seeping through the cracks. Susan couldn't sleep for weeks. I had to take time off work to handle the emotional fallout. Sarah's been crying through every church service. Tom flew back from Seattle twice, rearranging his entire life. I hadn't known about Tom. 2 trips. That was more than he'd managed in 3 years. And you know what the worst part is? Richard continued. We trusted you. We believed you. We reorganized our lives around your timeline. And the whole thing was just, what? Some kind of sick manipulation? At the time, I didn't realize what I was hearing. Not anger at the lie, anger at being caught. Because the timeline he described, the sleepless nights, the rearranged schedules, the tears, had all happened at a distance, in other area codes, in other lives. None of it had brought them to my hospital room. Where were you? I asked quietly. What? All that suffering you're describing, all that reorganizing, where were you actually? Because you weren't here. The silence that followed was different, sharper. That's not fair, he said finally. You don't get to turn this around. You don't get to make us the villains when you're the one who lied. But his voice had lost some of its certainty.
Sarah called 30 minutes later. She was crying before I even said hello. How could you do this to me? Her words came out choked, broken. I've been praying for you every single day, Mom. I've been on my knees asking God to give you peace, to ease your suffering, and it was all fake? Sarah, do you know what this does to my faith? Do you understand that I've been wrestling with God about why He would take you now, why He would test us this way, and the whole time it wasn't God, it was you? Her theology was convenient. God got credit for blessings, but apparently not for human cruelty. I made a mistake, I said. A mistake? Her crying intensified. A mistake is forgetting someone's birthday. This is betrayal. This is violating every sacred bond between parent and child. Sacred bond. The phrase felt hollow coming from 800 miles away. I'm sorry you're hurt, I said carefully. You're sorry I'm hurt? That's your response? Her voice rose, pain transmuting into anger. You trusted me. I believed you. I rearranged my entire ministry calendar because I thought I was going to lose my mother. And you're sorry I'm hurt? What did you rearrange? The question came out quieter than I intended. What? Your calendar. What did you change? A pause. This one heavier. I moved things around. I made adjustments. I was planning to visit next month. 4 weeks from now? Yes, I explained that. I explained very thoroughly. Another pause. This one heavier. You're really going to do this? Sarah's voice hardened. You're going to make this about us not being perfect enough for you after what you've done? Looking back now, I hear the fear underneath her anger, the awareness, not quite conscious, that her excuses sounded thin when spoken aloud. But at the time, all I heard was accusation. I should go, I said. Fine, go, but don't expect me to just forgive this. Don't expect any of us to just move past it like nothing happened. You've broken something, Mom. You've broken trust, and I don't know if that can be repaired. She hung up before I could respond. Tom's text came an hour later. Heard about what happened. Can't believe you'd do something like this. I'm done. Don't contact me. 21 words. Clinical. Final. From the son who'd been most absent, who'd sent 2 texts in 3 weeks, who'd never called. But now he was done. Now I'd crossed a line. I sat with my phone in my lap, staring at the screen until it went dark. That night, the hospital room felt different, colder. The machines beeped their usual rhythm, but the sound felt accusatory now, marking time I'd wasted, documenting a deception I couldn't take back. At the time, I didn't realize what I was feeling wasn't guilt about the lie. It was grief about the truth the lie had revealed. My children weren't angry that I'd lied about dying. They were angry that the lie had exposed their absence. And rather than face that absence, rather than ask why they hadn't come, they were making the lie the entire story. The deception became the villain, which made them the victims, which meant they never had to acknowledge what the notebook documented in careful, factual detail. They never had to face the empty chair. Mary came the next morning. She must have heard somehow. Hospital corridors carry news faster than phones. She didn't ask what happened, just pulled the chair close and took my hand. "They know," I said. I figured. "They're furious." "Of course they are." Mary's voice was gentle. "You held up a mirror. People don't like what they see. Maybe they're right to be angry. Maybe I am the villain here." Mary was quiet for a moment. Then she squeezed my hand. "You did something cruel to expose something crueler. That doesn't make you a villain. It makes you human and hurt and desperate to be seen." A tear slid down my cheek. I didn't wipe it away. "I don't know how to fix this," I whispered. "Maybe you don't fix it. Maybe you just finish it. Show them what you've been documenting. Let the facts speak. And then you decide what comes after." What if nothing comes after? What if I've burned everything down? Then at least you'll know the truth about what you were standing on. She stayed with me for an hour. We didn't talk much, just sat together in the mechanical hum of the hospital afternoon. After she left, I pulled out the notebook, opened it to the first page, read through every entry, every date and time and documented absence. The evidence was still there, still factual, still true. But it felt different now. Not like justice, like a weapon, and I had to decide whether to use it. At the time, I thought I had a choice, but the truth was already in motion, and within 48 hours, all of us, my children, Evan, Mary, and me, would be sitting in the same room for the first time in years, and the silence that followed would be louder than anything any of us had ever said. They came on Saturday, all 3 of them, together, for the first time in years. Richard arranged it. He sent a group text Friday night. "We need to discuss this as a family. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., Mom's hospital room." No question mark, no room for negotiation. I sat in my bed that morning, watching the clock. The minutes moved with cruel slowness. Nurses came and went, their routines unchanged by the storm gathering in the hallway outside. Mary arrived first. She didn't ask permission, just slipped in quietly and took up position in the corner chair, hands folded in her lap. A witness, an anchor. Evan came next. He looked at me, then at Mary, and seemed to understand immediately what was about to happen. He moved to stand beside my bed, close enough that I could feel his presence like a shield. At the time, I didn't realize how much I would need him there. Then, the door opened and my children filed in. Richard first,
suit jacket, even on a Saturday, his spine rigid with controlled fury. Sarah, behind him, eyes red-rimmed, clutching her purse like a life preserver. Tom last, hands shoved in his pockets, his jaw set in that familiar expression of defensive anger. The room shrank, the air thickened. Nobody spoke at first. We just looked at each other across the space that had grown between us. Years of distance compressed into a few feet of hospital linoleum. Richard broke the silence. His voice was measured, executive. "We're here because this situation requires resolution. What you did was unacceptable, but we're still a family, and families work through things." Work through things. As if this were a process problem, a workflow issue. That's why we think the best path forward is... "I documented it," I said quietly. Richard stopped mid-sentence. "What?" "Everything. I documented everything." I reached into the nightstand drawer, pulled out the notebook, set it on the table beside my bed. The blue cardboard cover looked harmless, innocent, but everyone in the room understood what it represented. "What is that?" Sarah's voice was thin, uncertain. "Records," I said simply, "of phone calls, visit schedules, excuses, times, dates, what was said, what wasn't." Richard's face hardened. "You kept records? You were documenting us while lying about being terminal?" "I was documenting the truth while testing a lie." The distinction landed poorly. I could see it in their faces. Tom spoke for the first time, his voice rough with anger barely contained. "This is insane. You're actually insane." "Tom!" Sarah started. "No, she's sitting there like some kind of prosecutor, like she's gathering evidence for a trial. This is manipulative. This is..." He struggled for words. "This is abusive." Abusive. The word hung in the air like acid. Looking back now, I understand what he was doing, making my documentation the crime, making my attention to their absence worse than the absence itself. But at the time, all I felt was cold clarity. "Open it," I said. "What?" Richard's eyes narrowed. "The notebook. Open it. Read it. I'm not going to participate in whatever psychological game. It's not a game. It's just facts, dates and times, things that actually happened or didn't." Sarah moved first, maybe because she was the most frightened, maybe because some part of her needed to know. She picked up the notebook with trembling hands, opened to the first page. Her eyes moved across my handwriting, down the columns of dates and durations and documented excuses. Richard leaned over her shoulder, read silently, his jaw tightened with each entry. Tom stayed where he was, arms crossed, refusing to look, but his eyes kept darting toward the notebook, toward the evidence he didn't want to face. The room fell silent except for the turning of pages. Sarah's breathing got shallower, Richard's face drained of color. Even Tom's defensive posture started to crack, because the notebook didn't lie. It didn't exaggerate or embellish. It didn't interpret or assign motive. It just stated what had happened. Phone call, 4 minutes. Reason for ending, conference call starting. Visit scheduled, postponed. Reason, scheduling conflict. Chair beside bed, empty. Duration, 14 days. 1 grandson, present. Frequency, daily. The arithmetic was undeniable. Sarah closed the notebook carefully, set it down like it might break. "This isn't fair," she whispered. "Which part?" My voice stayed steady. You're reducing everything to data, to numbers. You're not accounting for context, for circumstances, for everything we were dealing with." "I know what you were dealing with," I said quietly. "You told me, repeatedly, every time you called." Richard's control finally cracked. "So what exactly is this? Revenge? You want us to feel guilty? You want to punish us for having lives?" "I want you to see what you did." "We didn't do anything wrong." His voice rose, then caught, softened. "We were trying to be there for you while managing impossible situations. We were doing our best." "Your best was phone calls." "What else could we do? Quit our jobs? Abandon our families? Our responsibilities?" "Evan managed it." The words came out sharper than I intended. All three of them looked at Evan. He stood quietly beside my bed, hands in his pockets, meeting their gaze without flinching. "He's 17, Richard said, his voice tight. "He doesn't have the obligations." "He has school, homework, college applications, a life." I paused. "He chose to be here anyway." The silence that followed was different, heavier, because that simple fact that a 17-year-old had done what 3 grown adults couldn't exposed something none of them could rationalize away. Sarah started crying again, soft, defeated sounds. "I don't know what you want from us." "I don't want anything anymore. I just wanted you to see." "See what?" Tom's voice was raw now. "That we're terrible children? That we failed you? Fine, we see it. We're failures. Is that what you need to hear?" At the time, I didn't know how to answer that, because the truth was more complicated than condemnation. I didn't want them to be failures. I wanted them to understand why they'd failed. I wanted them to see the distance they'd created, the absences they'd normalized, the love they reduced to logistics. But saying that required a vulnerability I didn't know if I could access. Mary spoke for the first time. Her voice was gentle but firm. "Maggie doesn't need you to fail. She needs you to be honest." Richard turned to her, his expression sharp. "This is a family matter." "I've known this family for 37 years, and I've watched all of you turn away from hard conversations by scheduling around them." She stood up, walked to the table, placed her hand on the notebook. "These aren't accusations. They're just mirrors, and what you do with what you see is up to you." She looked at each of them in turn, then back at me. "What happens next is your choice, all of you." Then she left, quietly, leaving us alone with the evidence and each other. The machines beeped in the silence. Someone's phone buzzed. Sarah fumbled to silence it. Nobody moved to leave, but nobody moved closer either. We just stood there, separated by a few feet of floor that might as well have been miles. And I realized something I hadn't understood before. This wasn't the ending. This was the pause before the choice. They could walk out, could decide I'd gone too far, that the lie was unforgivable, that the documentation was proof of my cruelty rather than theirs. Or they could stay, could ask the question underneath all of this: why had absence become so easy? At the time, I didn't know which way they'd choose, but I knew that whatever happened next would define us, not as we'd been, but as we actually were, and whether that truth was something we could survive together, or whether it would be the thing that finally, irrevocably broke us apart. They didn't all stay. Tom left first. He walked out without saying goodbye, his footsteps heavy and final in the corridor. The door swung shut behind him with a pneumatic hiss that sounded like an ending. Sarah lingered near the doorway, torn between leaving and staying. Her hands twisted the strap of her purse into knots. "I need time," she said finally. Her voice was small, defeated. "I need to process this, to pray about it." "Okay," I said. She nodded, started to leave, then turned back. "I do love you, Mom. I hope you know that." The words hung in the air between us. Sincere, insufficient. "I know," I said. And I did. I believed she loved me. I just no longer believed that love alone was enough. After she left, only Richard remained. He stood at the foot of my bed, arms crossed, his executive composure rebuilt but fragile. A man trying to find solid ground after an earthquake. "I don't know how to fix this," he said finally. "Maybe it doesn't get fixed. Maybe it just gets acknowledged." He absorbed that, nodded slowly. I didn't realize how long it had been, since I visited, since any of us really showed up. His voice was careful, measured. "We got busy. We got comfortable assuming you'd always be there, that there would always be time." It wasn't an apology, but it was closer to truth than anything else he'd said. "I know," I said quietly. "But what you did, the lie, the documentation, that wasn't the answer." "No, it wasn't. It was just the only language I had left." Looking back now, I understand that was the closest we would come to reconciliation. Not forgiveness, not restoration, just mutual recognition of failure. Richard left shortly after. He squeezed my hand once before going. The gesture felt practiced, but not insincere. Then I was alone with Evan. He sat in the chair he'd occupied so many times before, pulled it close to the bed. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The machines beeped their familiar rhythm. Outside, evening light slanted through the blinds, painting bars of gold across the floor. "You okay?" he asked finally. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Are you?" He shrugged. "It was pretty intense. I'm sorry you had to be here for that." "I'm not," he met my eyes directly. Someone needed to see what actually happened, not just hear everyone's version of it. His clarity astounded me. At 17, he understood something my children might never grasp. That presence is the ultimate form of witness. "Thank you for staying," I said. Where else would I be? Such a simple question, but it contained everything I'd been trying to say for months. Where else would you be when someone you love needs you? Not at work, not at church, not managing schedules from 800 miles away. Here, right here. At the time, I didn't realize that moment was the beginning of something new. Not a family reunion, not a dramatic reconciliation, just a quiet redefinition of what family actually meant. Family wasn't who you were related to by blood or law. It wasn't who attended holiday dinners or appeared in photographs. Family was who showed up when showing up was difficult, who stayed when staying was uncomfortable, who held your hand not because it was convenient, but because it mattered. By that definition, I had one family member, and he was 17 years old. I went home 3 days later. The hospital discharged me with paperwork and instructions I didn't need. No treatment plan, no follow-up appointments, just a bland reminder to contact my physician if symptoms changed. The house felt different when I walked back in, smaller, quieter, but also mine in a way it hadn't been before. I didn't wait for permission to matter anymore, didn't measure my worth by who called or visited or remembered. I simply existed, on my own terms, with my own value intact. Evan still came by, once or twice a week now, less frequently than before, but with the same steady presence. We'd have tea, talk about his college applications, sit in comfortable silence. Mary visited too. We never discussed the hospital confrontation directly, but it sat between us like shared history, proof that witnessing matters, that truth, even painful truth, has weight. My children remained distant. Richard called occasionally, awkward but trying. Sarah sent cards with Bible verses and hearts drawn in the margins. Tom didn't contact me at all. I didn't chase them, didn't apologize beyond what I'd already said, didn't try to rebuild what we'd revealed as broken long before I'd ever lied about dying. Some relationships don't survive honesty, and forcing them to survive only creates different kinds of lies.
6 months later, I did get sick. Not terminal, just pneumonia. Serious enough to require hospitalization, but treatable with antibiotics and time. When the doctor told me, I felt a strange sense of irony. The boy who cried wolf, except this time the wolf was real and much smaller than advertised. I called Richard, told him simply, factually, no drama, no expectation. "Do you need me to come?" he asked. The question was genuine, uncertain, a man trying to learn a language he'd never quite mastered. "No," I said, "I'll be fine, but thank you for asking." After we hung up, I realized something had shifted. I wasn't testing anymore, wasn't documenting, wasn't holding mirrors up to force recognition. I was just living, sick sometimes, healthy sometimes, loved imperfectly by imperfect people. And somehow, that was enough. Evan visited me in the hospital during that real illness. He brought crossword puzzles again, and the same quiet presence that had first broken through my isolation. "You know what's funny?" I said as he refilled my water pitcher. "What?" "The second time I ended up here, it was real, and I didn't need anyone to prove anything." He considered that, nodded slowly. "Maybe that's the point. You don't need them to prove it anymore. You already know." "Know what?" "What you're worth. Who actually shows up. What love looks like when it's real." Looking back now, I see that he was right. The lie I'd told, the elaborate deception, the documentation, the confrontation, hadn't been about punishing my children. It had been about teaching myself to see clearly, to stop confusing words with action, sentiment with sacrifice, promises with presence. And once I learned to see clearly, I couldn't unsee it. Not just in them, in myself too. I had spent 72 years making myself small, believing that being low maintenance was a form of love, that erasing my own needs was virtue. But erasure isn't love, it's just slow disappearance. And I'd finally stopped disappearing. I'm 73 now, alive, healthy enough, still living in the house that's too big for one person but exactly the right size for me. My children and I speak occasionally. The conversations are cordial,
carefully boundaried. We've reached an unspoken agreement. We won't pretend the past didn't happen, but we won't dwell on it either. It's not the relationship I once wanted, but it's the one we actually have, and there's freedom in accepting reality instead of fighting for fantasy. Evan's in college now. He still calls every week, still visits when he's home, still shows up in the ways that matter. And Mary still comes by for tea. We sit in my kitchen, the one I refused to leave when Richard suggested managed care, and talk about everything and nothing. Last week, she asked me if I regretted it, the lie, the test, the confrontation. I thought about it carefully before answering. I regret the pain, I said. I regret the method, but I don't regret learning the truth. And what was the truth? I looked out the window at the autumn light falling across my small garden, at the life I'd built on my own terms, with my own hands, on my own value. That I was never optional, I said. I was just treated that way, and I don't have to accept that treatment anymore. Mary reached across the table, took my hand. No, she said quietly, you don't. And sitting there in my kitchen, my house, my life, my hard-won clarity, I finally understood what I'd been fighting for all along. Not revenge, not vindication, not even reconciliation. Just the simple, radical act of mattering, on my own terms, in my own right, whether anyone else showed up or not. And that, it turned out, was enough.